Maddison's that boy bands. You love them, you hate them. If you hate them, I'm side-eyeing you. Today we'll be talking about them and their impact on the world basically, and of course on me. So I think we first need to establish the definition of a boy band, and it really differs from person to person. There's not really one set definition. Okay, so this one says a pop group composed of young men whose music and image are designed to appeal primarily to a young teenage audience. So that's a pretty general definition, but if you really want to get to the juice of it, this is what this one says. A vocal group consisting of young male singers, usually in their teenage years or in their 20s at the time of formation. Generally, boy bands perform love songs marketed towards girls and young women. There's some specific wording here that kind of helps you to determine whether it's a boy band or not, but it's still just up for debate still, I think. Because in this definition it says vocal group specifically, and it needs to be a teen or young adult group. And another definition I saw also said they usually don't write their own music, they dance, or they're put together in a certain way. So it really depends, but we'll get more into that. So there are some bands that some people consider them boy bands, some people consider them a band, period. And sometimes the bands themselves say, we are not a boy band. Bands like 5 Seconds of Summer, they were against being called a boy band, especially at the beginning.
You know, a lot of time people say you guys are a boy band, and you say we're not a boy band, or certainly your fans say we're not a boy band, but you are all teenage boys, I guess, and you're in a band. What do you think of that? What's wrong with that description of being a boy band?
I think that title just kind of implies that we don't play or don't write our songs, and kind of makes us seem a little bit fake, I think. I don't know, to other people that don't know who we are, have listened to us.
They appealed a lot, of course, to younger women. So they just kind of automatically got called a boy band, but they all had their instruments they played. They wrote a lot. But later on, like more recently, they've kind of said, you can call us what you want as long as you like our music. It doesn't really matter what you call us, because I think especially in the recent years, boy band is less of a frowned upon term for bands. They're very sought after. So if you're in a boy band, that's probably a good thing. The Jonas Brothers also would get called a boy band sometimes, because they also, of course, appealed to young women. The first boy band. Who was the first boy band? A lot of people say the Beatles were the first boy band, mostly because of their fan response. It had its own name, Beatlemania. How intense girls were fangirling over them. This was one of the first examples of just full-on fangirling over a band of guys. Like the girlies in this video.
I love them. I don't care what anybody thinks. I love the Beatles for them, and I'll always love them. Even when I'm 105 and an old grandmother, I'll love them. And Paul McCartney, if you are listening. Adrienne from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart. I love you, Paul, and please come to the window so I can just see you. I saw you smoking before, and I kissed the limousine you looked out of. But I love you, and I want you, Paul. Please look at it. And Ringo, you can look at it too, because I like you.
There have been huge crowds of teenage girls outside complaining that they don't want to mob you, they just want to speak to you. What do you think about this? Do you want to talk to them?
Well, have you ever tried talking to about 200 people at once? We'd love to, you know. If we all wave, and if somebody always says, stop that waving, you're inciting them.
They get it. They really get it. They were living for it. They were living for it. I see myself in them. It's really not that different now, which I think is funny, like how the fangirl experience is very similar in its own ways in the 60s as it is now. I think it was interesting with the Beatles because guys also really liked them too, and they didn't think it was uncool to like the Beatles.
Like the Beatles?
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah. Good as Presley?
Yeah.
Which you would not have seen really at the peak of a lot of boy bands, you would not have seen that. So the Beatles also led to the Monkees, the Osmonds, the Jackson 5, and other groups throughout the 70s and the 80s. And other people say that New Edition was the first boy band. The group reached its height of popularity in the 1980s and is considered the blueprint for what would become the modern boy band. So as you will see, and I didn't realize this, a lot of boy bands have the same manager or the same team, which we'll talk about in a second. We have lots of like foreshadowing here. There was also Take That in the UK, which I had never heard of until I was a huge One Direction fan and I knew everything about the UK and boy bands in the UK. A lot of boy bands would start out going to Europe to try out their songs, see the reaction to them, and then they would eventually come to the United States. And of course, the Backstreet Boys in '93, NSYNC in 1995, and 98 Degrees in 1997. There were just like a lot. Like when I made this list, I was like, oh, there are actually a lot. Because when I think about it, I only think of a few really. And they're even like way more than this, but these were ones that I knew of mostly. And when I was younger, I remember the album New Kids on the Block, Backstreet Boys, and they did a collab album. And those girlies, they must have been freaking out. And of course, there was Big Time Rush in 2009. They kind of had a different formula than a lot of them because they had their own Nickelodeon show. I thought that was like the first time that had been done, but that's been done a few times. Like with the Monkees, they had their own show and they were also a band too. And then My True Loves, One Direction, and then BTS. I don't know much about BTS. I know they're a K-pop band, but they dance, they sing, you know, they're a group of them. So I don't know, like, I'd consider them a fun boy band. So the music of boy bands is usually catered to teens, young women, telling them how much they love them, want to be with them. A lot of it's love songs, like I miss you baby. The first one that comes to mind, What Makes You Beautiful. Just the title alone, you know, it's a sweet song about you don't know you're beautiful, that's what makes you beautiful. It was the perfect intro song for them, and that's just one example of so many songs. Teen girls especially will cling on to that and be like, yes, thank you so much, I'm in love with you, thank you for giving me this compliment. I've noticed that the longer a boy band lasts, they usually get more involved in the writing of the music, and they may start writing about different things that mean a lot more to them personally, but usually when they're starting out, they have other people writing for them or telling them kind of what kind of songs to make to appeal to young women. And usually you're gonna gravitate to one member of said boy band. It usually has to do with their personality type, who you think's the cutest. If you're really into it, you can tell by the way someone is dressed, especially at, say, one of their concerts, who their favorite is. You can tell how long they exist. I read that they last usually less than 7 years, which in the scheme of things is not very long for a super popular band. They try to fit in, you know, as many albums, as many tours, as much merch, as much money they can. They're squeezing out as much money as they can in those few years because I think they know deep down that it's not gonna last forever. You can still last, like with Big Time Rush and Backstreet Boys, they're still together, but it's not, there's something about the teen and young women that you're making bang. This word may trigger some people, including me. We have to talk about the hiatus. They're never a hiatus, are they? In 2015, we were hearing hiatus, hiatus, hiatus. One Direction's going on hiatus. 18 months, guys. We'll be back in 18 months. This was after Zayn had left. 8 years later, we're like, I was holding out hope during those 18 months. I was like, they'll be back, guys. Even though I was seeing them each go off and do their own thing, doing their solo careers, being successful in other things, living their lives, relaxing for once. And I was like, they're still coming back. They're not gonna let us down. This is where my trust issues began. But I should have looked at the history of boy bands. Lance Bass, it was a clip of him on TikTok on a podcast, and he said, yeah, we were supposed to go on a hiatus for 6 months. And when I heard him say hiatus, I said, NSYNC went on said hiatus. They never came back. This says, in 2002, they said they were going on a hiatus for 6 months to pursue solo projects, and then they'd reunite and record their next album. That album never happened, and the hiatus has lasted 20 years and counting. Me and the 2002 girlies, we get it. Shared trauma together. I'm just kidding. Like, you can either go the Backstreet Boys route or the NSYNC route, and they're both the different examples of how it could go if you're in a boy band. Boy band rivalries. I don't know too much about other boy bands that I haven't known about my whole life, so there may be some I'm leaving out. There was the NSYNC and Backstreet Boys rivalry because they were popular around the same time. NSYNC came along after Backstreet Boys were together for a while. This rivalry, from what I can't say the word rivalry. This rivalry, I've heard, was more forced upon them. It wasn't exactly real. I'm sure there were parts of it that were like real, you know, like there's competition, but I always heard that they were nice to each other and they were friends even, and they talked a lot behind the scenes. But I think it was kind of forced upon them by their manager. They had the same manager. I didn't know this until recently. Both bands have spoken out about it. They both cut ties with him. They've had to pay him off. There's a documentary on YouTube called The Boy Band Con. One of the executive producers was Lance Bass from NSYNC. There's another documentary about the Backstreet Boys where they talk about him in a not so great way. They had to pay him off like tens of millions of, I think it was about 20 something million dollars. I think that's where kind of the rivalry came from, and they were kind of forced to be rivals. In the Backstreet Boys documentary, they were kind of talking about how they kind of felt like they were backstabbed by him because they were doing well themselves, but then he signs NSYNC and is working with them.
If we got tired and didn't want to tour, didn't want to do a certain TV show or whatever, boom, NSYNC was right there. Lou basically created our competition.
But I guess that's, you know, business, but at the same time, this man was not good. And it said that the No Strings Attached album from NSYNC has to do with them cutting ties with Lou Pearlman and how like they're not under his management anymore, and you know, they've cut ties with him. But then we have the One Direction and the Wanted rivalry. This was just a Twitter rivalry. I would call it more of like beef between them, or them just like roasting each other on Twitter. They would post a picture of Zayn and be like, okay, bad boy. It was kind of laughable stuff, but it was funny. This was like when Twitter was like a new thing, and they were like, oh, we can say whatever we want on this app. Like we could just said. Even in their prime days, the average boy band only exists for just under 7 years, which is just about long enough to rise to fame, make a lot of money, have a few arguments between themselves or with labels, and then move on. The life cycle of a boy band is not long at all, which allows them to be replaced by another, and then another, which is exactly what's been happening since the 80s. As long as there are stans, there will be music moguls that want to cater to them and create these well-rounded boy bands to do so. However, it's not as easy to do that now. Fans are getting smarter and are able to see through the lack of genuineness that came with some of these bands. If a boy band is to be successful going forward, then they need to feel genuine and they need to engage with their audience. Part of the success of boy bands is that their fan base, which is mainly young women, is so unbelievably diehard and supportive. And you know why that is? Because they embrace young female music fans. I do think that that is a thing that has to happen, especially in the future with boy bands, is that there has to be something genuine about them, as genuine as it can be. Everything can't be like just super raw genuine. But I think that's, I'm gonna come back to it, which is why One Direction became so popular when they were, is that we had seen the more manufactured dancing boy bands, which, you know, is its own thing, but I think people were looking for something a little bit different. It was more personality based to me. I remember I started really liking them and really becoming a fan of them when I would see their silly just personalities and seeing how they didn't dance, they just kind of were themselves as much as they could be. It was perfect. It's a magical experience. The boy band experience is a magical experience, especially when you're the perfect age. You know that it is catered for you. Fan culture. This is what they wanted to happen, was fan culture. They want us to buy the posters. They want us to buy the merch. They want us to buy the albums. They want us to want to date them, I think. And they want us to kind of think that they want to date us too. I think the guys that were in these boy bands did the very best they could to cater to the girls and to be nice and thankful for the fans. That's what I always really appreciated about all the boy bands that I've seen, is that they don't think it's embarrassing for them to have teen girls, young girls as their fans. They're not like, oh, we want to be taken seriously. You're being taken seriously by me. Isn't that enough? Speaking from experience, being a young woman who loves music can be exhausting, as you can get pushed to the side for the other fans, which make the band seem more legitimate. But one of the common threads through all of these bands is that they appreciated the support of young women. They acknowledged the fact that they would not be successful without the young women who were shouting from the rooftops about how great they are and buying multiple copies of every single piece of music they put out. Did they do this so these young women would continue to make them a lot of money? Probably. But the fans felt like they were being heard, and that's all fans ever really want. Quite frankly, maybe rather than scoff at boy bands, some of the more alternative bands and artists that consider themselves higher than thou should take a leaf out of their book. Like, they slayed with our one. One of the songs I think about with all this is Pop by NSYNC. They're like, we're making pop music and pop music is good, no matter how much you don't want to admit it. Sick and tired of hearing all these people talk about what's the deal with this pop life, when's it gonna fade out? The thing you've got to realize, what we're doing is not a trend. We've got the gift of melody. We're gonna bring it till the end. Why do you want to try to classify the type of thing that we do? Because we're just fine doing what we like. Can we say the same for you? Tired of feeling all around me animosity. Just worry about yours, because I'm gonna get mine. Now people, can't you see? Accessibility and appreciating the fans is really important in the whole boy band formula, because if they were just like, we're just doing this for money, like, okay, y'all need to stay away from us. I get that there's definitely a part of that, but fans always want to see that they appreciate their fans and that they don't take them for granted. This clip always stuck with me of Niall from One Direction getting followed by paparazzi, and you see these girls going up to him trying to take pictures with him while he's walking. When the girls are standing by him trying to take pictures, you can hear the paparazzi being like, move, move.
Niall!
No, go!
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Thank you so
Go,
much.
get out of the way.
We love you so much.
What you mean, girl? Wait, don't pay my bills, are you?
I was just like, he's taking up for us, like. I was like, yeah, I'm paying his bills, whatever. A couple of examples of some fans just running with it, taking it like pretty far. JC from NSYNC said he liked Reese's peanut butter cups, and I guess it was the next day or a little bit later, there was a pile of them that fans had left at his door. There was an example, Louis from One Direction, he said, I like girls who eat carrots. Since then, he received plenty of carrots. They will say they like one thing and the fans will be like, I have to get this for him right now. It was like every little thing about them that they would reveal to you, it would be like, okay, I know this new information about them and it would kind of make you feel like you were closer. It was a very intense, for some people, like parasocial relationship to where they were like, I need to show him my appreciation for him by showing up at his door with Reese's peanut butter cups because he told us that he liked them. So, and I love seeing videos like this video with the Backstreet Boys, like recently in the past few years, and you see their fans grown up.
Oh my God! What is happening? Wait a minute! Oh my God!
They still have that fangirl in them. They're probably married. Some of them are probably married, may have children, but they still have that fangirl in them. I think it's just like one of the purest emotions that you see coming from them. Like you open an elevator door and you see this boy band, you're like taken back in time and you're like, I'm a 16-year-old girl seeing these boys that I have crushes on and like so much. I just think it's sweet, and they've probably been fans for just like 20 years and they're like, oh my goodness, they probably never thought that would happen in their lives. Technology and boy bands. During the NSYNC and Backstreet Boys era, I think a lot of it was TV that was really helping them. Maybe like the radio was where you would first hear about them. Actually, the first time I saw One Direction was on TV, so it was still like a thing. A big thing that made like One Direction popular was Twitter, because Twitter was like blowing up at that time. You could put your music videos on YouTube. You know, it was before social media like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. It was really interesting because I watched a couple videos about this. Like their management would have them travel. They did this with both NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. They would go to Europe. They would basically like give them a trial run in Europe because that was where they could kind of test out how people would react to them. And then it would eventually make its way into the United States, was how it kind of worked. And that's how it worked for, you know, One Direction, of course, started in Europe, made its way down to the United States. Over in Europe, they know, they're ahead of us. They're ahead of us. I'm so sorry, like they were ahead. The boy band ends. What are the guys gonna do when it's over? Solo careers. Usually they'll go toward a solo singing career, sometimes acting, hosting. A lot of them do hosting jobs actually. Like one of them's the host of Love is Blind and I'm like, oh hey Nick. It's really interesting to see whose solo careers like really take off. Justin Timberlake, he basically became known as his own thing after NSYNC. I think there are a lot of people that know of Justin Timberlake but may not know he was in NSYNC, like if you're a little bit younger. And then also Harry Styles, his solo career has super taken off. They were probably like, we're not going back to that boy band. Like we're not going back, which is kind of sad. And you know, some solo careers that they've attempted just haven't really probably gone the way that they had hoped that they would. I don't think it had anything to do with their talent. I think the biggest thing in those was their teams. If they got the right people and like they got that right mix of like what they were trying to do, then it probably could have worked better for them. Because some of them I'm like, oh, they had good music as solo artists and they were amazing singers, but it just didn't quite work out probably as they had hoped. But I'm sure they're fine. You know, I'm sure they're doing just fine. And reunions, we've had some reunions. I can only imagine how like huge fans of these people, seeing them finally reunited, like NSYNC, they reunited a few times. We're hoping for that One Direction reunion. For me at least, like if two members of the group are seen together or if they like post something together, you're like, this is a reunion. This is close enough. Almost there to a reunion. We've talked about boy bands of the past. What is the future of boy bands? We've kind of seen boy bands get formed and, you know, not reach that super worldwide famous status. We've seen it attempted a few times. I watched this show, it was in 2017, it was called Boy Bands. Nick from the Backstreet Boys, He was one of the judges. It was basically a singing competition, or a competition for boy bands to have the next big boy band. The one that won, I think they have broken up since then, and that lasted one season. It was a good show. I liked it. I think no matter how hard people try, it just has to be like the right mixture. It has to be at the right time too, because I don't think the Backstreet Boys of the early 2000s, if they were started now, would have worked the same way. And I think if, you know, the boy bands now had tried back then, it wouldn't have worked. I think it's way harder now to start a boy band, especially from scratch, and it feel authentic. I think a lot of it has to do with social media, because they have to like show their personalities, and it has to feel authentic. I think it really just probably has to come out of nowhere. I don't think it can be manufactured or super manufactured, or not look super manufactured. Maybe it is, but maybe not look super manufactured. But I know I'm probably no longer at the age to where they're trying to appeal to, so it's hard for me to know. I'm excited to see who's next on the scene in the boy band world. Let me know if you know of any like current boy bands that I have never heard of that you think are just gonna blow up. Yay! I could talk about this for like 8 hours, but I had to hold back a little bit. But yeah, I'll see you guys at the One Direction reunion. Bye. Or should I say bye bye bye. Ooh.